Hi, and welcome to Real Talk. I'm Ron Strand. We're glad that you're joining us tonight. Really excited about the guest that we have on tonight, Dr. Richard Bartlett. We'll get to that in a minute. But I just want to let you know, if you haven't followed us on Facebook yet, be sure to do so. Or if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. You'll be notified every time we go live. We're happy that you're joining us and excited that you're part of what we're doing. Also, if you want to learn more about what the Upper Room is and what we're doing, you can find us on our website at theupperroompresents.com. That's theupperroompresents.com. As I said, I'm really excited tonight about Dr. Richard Bartlett being on my show. I first saw him, my wife and I came across a interview that he was doing, and this had to be back in the early stages of COVID. And he was being interviewed by a woman. I'm not quite sure if I remember the name of the show, but he was talking about a treatment that he had that was pretty, well, not only just pretty successful, but very successful. And we're going to talk about that. But a little bit about him. He's a physician, practices in West Texas. And during a 48-hour shift that he had, an on-call shift, and was seeing COVID patients, he was wondering what can he do to help these patients who are coming in with these symptoms, these chronic symptoms. And I'm going to let him tell the rest of the story there because it's really quite an amazing story. We're glad to welcome Dr. Bartlett. Welcome, Dr. Bartlett. How are you?
Well, Ron, it's an honor to be here with you in the upper room. And, to fill in the rest of the story, I was working a 48-hour shift in the emergency room, working as an ER doctor. Yes. I also have done family practice and had a 30-year career of many things, being medical director of ambulance services, public and private, hospice and nursing homes, being medical director of a hospital. And so I'd done many things, but in the beginning of the pandemic, I was working a 48-hour shift in the ER, and we had just been told by President Trump, hey, try hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and a Z-Pack, what do you got to lose? And I was excited to hear something because we were told there was nothing you could do. And then a few days later, Anthony Fauci shoots that down. And that's the atmosphere when I showed up in the ER. And so I was feeling distraught. I was worried, Lord, what do I do? If someone comes in here and they say, I can't breathe, and they're dying from COVID, because we've just been told there's nothing to do. Just shelter in place, hide, wait for Anthony Fauci and his crew to come up with a vaccine. It was the only thing that was offered to us. So we were, me and the nurses and the x-ray techs, in between patients coming in from car wrecks to heart attacks to lacerations to sew up. I was waiting to see if we were going to have a COVID patient come in distress and having to stabilize them, which is what we do in the emergency room. And so I was praying in between patients, Lord, what do I do if someone comes in here? And had a moment where I could go into the call room and take a quick cat nap because it was a 48-hour shift. Yeah. And before I woke up, it was like all at once I had, some people describe this, I've heard the word download, but it all hit me at once of using a medicine that's an inhaled steroid called budesonide in a nebulizer treatment. That's the way you deliver it, which is a simple device that every preschooler with asthma uses every day, and also an aspirin and an antibiotic called clarithromycin, and the reasons why. And so I woke up and I was ecstatic. I was the only one in the little call room in the middle of West Texas and had nobody to tell this to. But 5 days later, I had my first COVID patients, and they lived. And we were being told that if you have diabetes, you're obese, you have asthma, that you're a goner back then, 3 months into the pandemic, and they sailed through it and recovered quickly. And I just had one patient after the other that was serious diseases, comorbidities like cancer, on chemotherapy, had radiation a month before, and they were sailing through COVID, recovering quickly. And so I was excited, and I had that interview with Debbie Georgiatos from America Can We Talk. That was in July of 2020. and that went viral. I'd never looked for interviews like that, and for this to go 5 million views in 2 weeks, and then YouTube pulls it, which shocked me because I thought everybody would be excited that there was an answer to this crisis. And so that was the beginning of censorship and being aware of what's really happening in the world right now. But at that time, I was naive. I thought that surely everybody would be excited that there was something we could do, Ron. And so, but we kept getting the message out and started running into people that I had heard about that I never thought I'd run into, like RFK Jr. And during that interview, the audio got cut by Instagram Live while I was doing that. So all of a sudden it became very real to me that many things are being monitored in real time and being censored. And we're in a different time in human history right now. But my message has been from the beginning that, number one, how incredible the God that created the universe would hear this single insignificant person's prayer by himself in a little room and give me a strategy that could change the world, and literally has been used around the world. And that, number one, he answers prayer. Number two, he's involved in the details of our lives, and he's relevant. How amazing that he's so relevant. A worldwide crisis, and he cares about that enough that he'll give an answer. And the other thing that came to me, Ron, was, wow, this provision, this medicine's been around for decades. Aspirin's been around forever. These are readily available solutions. In other words, the provision was here before the problem.
Yeah.
And that encourages me as well.
And I want to get to some of that. I want to talk about masks. I want to talk about Dr. Fauci. I want to talk about the vaccine and so forth. But let's get a little bit about, because you have an interesting history, not only as an ER doctor, but you've served out in the field. Tell us a little bit about what you've done as a doctor with your giftedness as a physician, and how you've used that for the Lord.
Well, there's, I guess I need to start with, in first grade, I heard the best news in the world at a little Baptist church in Memphis, Tennessee. And that's when I heard what Jesus had done for me and accepted that gift. And that changes everything. And you grow up and you go through many circumstances, but I met my best friend, my wife in college, and we've been married for 34 years now and have 7 children. The first 6 are adopted, 3 from other countries. And that was absolutely part of our destiny. We knew that we were supposed to do that together. But after we had our 7 children here, and I had the opportunity to go in the mission field to North Iraq with an organization called World Missions Alliance. And World Missions Alliance is led by Chuck and Helen Todd. And so I was excited about going and helping with this Syrian refugee crisis. They had refugee camps, and Chuck said, hey, come and help. They're open to any help we can give. And so I thought, well, I can do something. And so we brought some medicines to, I gathered some medicines, and we were lined up, bought our tickets, and then ISIS happens. And we're watching the news on the couch for months after I had bought my ticket to go to North Iraq. And we were waiting to see if we were going to keep going, and the trip wasn't canceled, and I felt like the Lord wanted me to go. I was 50 years old, the medical director of an emergency room, and I had those real heart checks where I had to think, you know, when will I be old enough to do the right thing if God tells me to do something dangerous? There's 18-year-olds that go and they put their life on the line for us every day in the military. And how old do I need to be to do the right thing? And if this is what God wants me to do, then I need to do it. And so me and my 17-year-old son at the time flew to North Iraq, and we were in Duhok, Iraq, which is the center of ISIS-infested Iraq at the time, in November of 2014. And actually, when we got there, we found out that ISIS headquarters was 30 minutes down the road. in Mosul. And so we were 30 minutes away from Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, and ISIS headquarters for 10 days. When you're in that type of atmosphere, where it's very dark spiritually and it's desperate, I saw with my own eyes and experienced the goodness of God in the most desperate circumstances. And so I wrote a book about my experience as an eyewitness report so that people could see that even in the worst of times, in the most desperate circumstances, when things look the darkest and the most hopeless, that you can see the most amazing things, that God is not absent, He's still on His throne, and He's still capable. And so we saw people who were generationally caught in patterns of despair and destruction rescued in a moment in that type of setting on that 10-day trip. And so that was the beginning of 13 trips that I've led on medical missions to places that were in desperate situations. Like we went to Nepal in June of 2015, and there had been 3 earthquakes before we got there. Almost 9,000 people had been literally crushed in these earthquakes when buildings collapsed on them or there were landslides. And so we showed up on the heels of that when 80% of the population of the whole country was homeless. 4 out of 5 people had lost their homes, were living in tents, living under tarps, under makeshift shelters of wood and cardboard. And so when we showed up in that atmosphere again, I was amazed to see how God did things that I did not expect. And one of the things I learned is you just got to show up, because there's things that we can't do, but God can. But He needs us to show up. And so we're in those times here in the United States right now and around the world that we need to have the courage to show up, Ron. And we don't know what God will do, but we know that God can. And I can tell you He's not absent and that He is doing things. And so we just need to be obedient.
If you've just joined us, we're talking to Dr. Richard Bartlett, and we're talking about his treatment that is a very effective treatment. Now, just to be clear, you're napping, and this download comes to you, and the budesonide, which is an inhaler, as you said.
So budesonide is an inhaled steroid,
yes,
and you can put it in a nebulizer machine, a little breathing machine that costs like $45.
Yes.
And that was part of the strategy. And when I got this strategy and started using it and talking about it in interviews and every time I had an opportunity to tell someone, I was telling them we're not hopeless or helpless. Look at this, it's working.
But the budesonide, and then you said there was another steroid. What was that?
So budesonide is the inhaled steroid.
Yes.
And so it's targeted. But the other medicine is clarithromycin. It's a antibiotic pill, mm-hmm, and it comes as a syrup for children. And when you look at the strategy, that antibiotic, clarithromycin, is generic. It's inexpensive. It's at every pharmacy on every corner. And so it's not expensive. There's not a lot of obstacles to give it. And it covers the walking pneumonia, the atypical bacteria, as well as the encapsulated bacteria called Streptococcus pneumonia, which both of those can cause pneumonia. So it's a good fit. But the budesonide, when I started to do research to reverse engineer why this was working so well, I was shocked at the details of the research that had been done over the last several decades, showing that we had heard that there's a cytokine storm, and that's those inflammatory chemicals that are released from the lung lining with this disease. Like no other disease do we have a cytokine storm with COVID. Well, when I looked at the research, inhaled corticosteroids, which is what budesonide is, shuts down the release of those very same identical chemicals, which is interleukin 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 11, 13, 15, thromboxane, which causes the increased clotting, cyclooxygenase, all these chemicals, we knew the names of them. And they were all released from the lung lining as inflammatory chemicals called cytokines. And it was a perfect match. When you overlay what budesonide would block the release of, it's exactly those chemicals. And so I was just amazed. And further, there's 2 inhaled corticosteroids that you could use. One is fluticasone and another one's budesonide. And those have been compared in a decade ago. And the one medicine, fluticasone, increases your chance of secondary bacterial pneumonia 3 times. But budesonide didn't in the same study. So in every way, this was the perfect match. And so in an interview, I called the budesonide the silver bullet of the strategy, and immediately got some flack for that. But later it was proved by Oxford University to literally be a game changer. Oxford University did 2 randomized controlled trials called the STOIC trial and the Principal trial, and Oxford concluded that 90% of hospitalizations, ER visits, and even urgent care visits could be prevented with that one medicine, an inhaled budesonide treatment against one disease, COVID. And I thought that would be just celebrated around the world, but it was really suppressed.
Yeah. Now, did Oxford actually get your treatment and then check it out? Is that how they did it, or did they come to the same conclusion?
So I presented it, and then
Yes.
France started studying budesonide against COVID, and so did Spain, Oxford University at the UK, Queensland, Australia, their university also started studying it, and then eventually the NIH, the National Institute of Health in the United States, also studied budesonide against COVID. Everybody was landing on the same conclusion eventually, and so I felt vindicated, validated at that point, because I was receiving a great deal of resistance at that point. And so when Oxford completed their study, I thought that everybody would be thrilled because the science was settled. We had not just one randomized controlled trial, but 2 from Oxford University. And so it has been used around the world. When I looked at what was happening in India, in Uttar Pradesh, that province that was being hit by COVID, and the health advisors in that province were sending out, I got a report sent to me that they were sending to the health provinces, and they were recommending hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and budesonide. And so interesting that they shut down the pandemic and the disaster that was happening in that province of 240 million people in Uttar Pradesh, India, in short order with that strategy. So this is something that's traveled around the world. After I did that first interview that went viral, my phone was ringing so fast, Ron, that I couldn't even pick it up. I'd be pushing on the phone and it just would not even answer. It was insane. Amazing. I was getting calls from around the world, but thank God I'm a messenger. I can't be everybody's doctor. There's doctors and nurse practitioners and physician assistants that are standing in the gap for people around the world, treating them. And so we have many people that have survived and recovered, but I'm a messenger. So it's not really about me. It's about the Lord gives winning strategies, and He's the provider.
Oh, isn't that true? Dr. Bartlett, you have affirmation by Oxford study. You have France and Australia and some of these other countries that are utilizing this, but where is the CDC? Where is WHO in all this? And are they hearing about it, and what are they doing with this information?
So Ron, to be clear, I work in the emergency room. I've been running clinics for oil companies out here in West Texas where I live. Been a part of setting up those oil companies. And so I've worn many hats in my career. Currently an emergency room doctor. And when I presented this information and it went viral on that interview, shortly after that, there was an interview that went on the internet with Anthony Fauci and Matthew McConaughey, an A-list actor. And Matthew McConaughey was asking him, what about budesonide against COVID? There's people that think that works. And Anthony Fauci answered Matthew McConaughey, well, in reality, Matthew, it's just a placebo. It doesn't really work. People may think that it's helping them, but it doesn't really work. And so that was his message, almost like a hit job, in my opinion, shortly after my interview went viral. And so as far as motives, God knows the hearts of people, but I can tell you that historically happened, and that was in contrast to the science that Oxford University proved.
Let's talk about Anthony Fauci. So much controversy around this man, but he's a hero on the left. And we've had so much misinformation or conflicting information out of this individual for the past 2 years. What is his angle, in your opinion? Why would this information be suppressed?
Well, Ron, I can tell you that for 7 years, I was an advisor to Governor Rick Perry for Texas as a health advisor. And it was a 2-year appointment to a newly formed task force. And after the 2 years, he asked me if I'd serve another year. And that went on and on for a total of 7 years. And at the end of that, I received the Meritorious Service Award from the Commissioner of Health and Human Services for Texas. And so I had been in leadership as an advisor in healthcare for many years. But I had never heard of Anthony Fauci until January 2020. I think that's significant, that he was not a part of the solutions that I was aware of on anything. And so when this new character shows up January 1, 2020, saying some extreme things that didn't really add up for me in my mind, we were all caught off guard. A lot of us did not see this coming. We didn't realize that this would be something that would be life-changing and human history changing. But he seemed to be pretty comfortable with what was going on. And so first, I didn't know who he was, even though I was involved in healthcare leadership for a long time. Mm-hmm. Secondly, when I looked at what he was saying, when he did that hit job, in my opinion, it was a hit job on the internet against budesonide, a solution that really made sense, that was intuitive, that was a good solution. I think that was revealing because he, number one, what did he not say? He didn't offer, this is based on this randomized controlled trial, this is not based on this study. He didn't offer any science behind it. You know, we've all heard that at this point that he said something along the lines of, if you question me, you're questioning science because I am science. That's a paraphrase. That really is telling. When it comes from someone who I have heard say the public should not wear a mask, and then later the public should wear a mask because it's a symbol, we're in it together, with air quotes, like that's what a scientist does. Yeah. And then he says, well, maybe 2 masks. And then he says, if you get a shot, you don't have to wear the mask. And then he says, if you get a shot, you have to wear the mask. After a while, just common sense would tell any American that all of those can't be true. One of those might be true, but 6 conflicting answers can't all be correct. And so if you look at all of that put together, there's a scripture that says, my sheep hear my voice, and the voice of a stranger they will not follow. And we know that our God is a God of order. But when you hear conflicting information out of the same voice over and over again that contradicts itself, that brings unsettling effect, and it can bring fear. Yes. And so looking at a lot of things that his messaging and how he's presented it, I haven't heard anything that I could relate to as far as optimism and hope. I actually have heard in the contrary, as far as a spirit behind what's been presented. Those that are not listening to him regularly, I got to say, in general, they seem to be more peaceful. You ask, where were the leaders, the healthcare leaders that we've looked at, the CDC, the World Health Organization, Anthony Fauci? Well, that was Anthony Fauci's response before that message got out to the whole world, was to suppress it, basically. And I haven't heard him retract that yet, even though Oxford proved it. And so then you start looking at what's happening with the CDC and the World Health Organization, and there's been a lot of things that make no sense that have happened since then that I think don't have science to back it. Like when he said that, he didn't quote any science, he just said it. And so we've seen a lot of things like that that don't make science sense to me. But they haven't, the CDC and the World Health Organization still have not promoted these inexpensive, readily available, safe solutions to this problem. Therapies that help people make it to the other side. You know, inhaled steroids, this is a disease, COVID is a disease that we've never had before. We've never had anything like this before. And so we learned as we went, but this strategy is amazing. It decreases the release of the cytokines, the inflammatory chemicals. It stops the inflammation in the lungs. It stabilizes their breathing. Remember, we've all heard that people are going in the hospital because they have trouble breathing. And I happen to be an advanced trauma life support instructor, and that's a course that every emergency room doctor has to take to work in the emergency room. And we teach people how to stabilize airway, breathing, circulation. Breathing's really important. And so this is one of the tools that we have that can be used in a unique way to stabilize the breathing for a worldwide pandemic. And so I understand how, I actually teach doctors how to stabilize breathing, and this makes perfect sense. It's very intuitive, but when I did the research and looked at the plethora of information about budesonide, it was amazing how this was it just fit perfectly with this problem.
Well, talking about some of the craziness and nonsense behind the way they've handled this, I think you had mentioned that patients were going into hospitals, they were masking them and then putting plastic bags over their head, if I'm not mistaken. That sounds crazy, but you had mentioned something to that effect. What was that?
Well, you know, during this pandemic, number one, my message has been we're not helpless, we're not hopeless, yes. That we don't need to be driven by fear. And I can say that I started to notice a pattern when some of these spokesmen for healthcare were on the TV regularly, that they were telling us they were afraid of this, they were concerned about that. Basically, I was aware that a lot of the decisions were made out of, it seemed like the motive was fear. And so one of the things that makes no sense that happened in West Texas, in Odessa, Texas, was the county hospital had made a decision that they were going to put plastic equipment bags over patients' heads as soon as they were diagnosed with COVID. And these plastic bags were made for equipment, and they would come down to the waist. And so I became aware of it about a year into the pandemic. I don't believe they even had a written protocol for this because it was that insane. And initially they defended it. And so we had some pictures go viral on the internet, and that's how I found out about it. I saw this teenager's picture with this bag over her head down to her waist with a mask on, and I didn't see any oxygen being given to her. When I talked to the patient's mother, she said, yeah, in fact, she was feeling so anxious, her oxygen was low, it was down in the 80s, then they put the plastic bag over her, and she was feeling so claustrophobic that she tried to pull the mask off underneath the bag and was scolded and reprimanded and had to put that, and shamed into putting the mask back on underneath the plastic bag. And that she said, in fact, her daughter was not on oxygen at the time, and I didn't see any oxygen in the picture. And so when I saw that, I'm used to stabilizing patients. It's simple common sense that if someone is low on oxygen, you supply oxygen to them. You don't put them in an atmosphere with a plastic bag over their head, which every parent knows is a suffocation hazard for a child. The state inspected the hospital, and they found that actually there were multiple infractions. And so but for a whole year, this was accepted by the doctors, the nurses, the therapists in that hospital as normal, watching people roll down the hallways with plastic bags over their heads. I'm saying you see things that don't make, there is no science behind some of these things, It's really fear that is causing some of these decisions to be made. A fear of spreading the virus, and so they do something that's totally irrational, totally medically unsound, non-scientific, no science to back it up, and it gets to it becomes accepted to the point that every healthcare worker there is comfortable with watching this happen for a year. And so that's just one example of the craziness of the non-science and the nonsense that's happened because of a spirit of fear that's been driving people.
Well, Dr. Bartlett, I think that's a great place for us to wrap up tonight, because I want to get into more detail next week on this. Such great information, and we'll explore the rest of that next week. So, folks, thanks for watching. And remember, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. That's God's promise. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. God bless.